Hi, everybody. My name is Natalie Yeadon. I'm the co-owner and managing director with Impetus Digital. Thank you for all of you being here. I'm also the Toronto chapter lead for the transformative technology community. If you're not familiar with Impetus, we have actually offer some cutting edge asynchronous and synchronous virtual tools and collaboration tools for the life science companies. And we offer a whole series of digital services for things like advisory boards, investigator meetings, medical education, internal meetings. And as you can probably all imagine, with COVID-19, there's been a huge bolus of people that have had to go and virtualize a lot of these in-person meetings that they've been running. So we've been extremely busy. But we really believe at Impetus that everything starts with a conversation. And so our online collaboration platform acts like kind of like a catalyst or bridge to start some of these conversations. But it's not just about starting conversations. It's about sustaining them, building authentic partnerships, building relationships, allowing people to not only solve problems overnight, but to be able to create something over time. And having these big, hairy, audacious dialogues and conversations so that you can start implementing change and positively disrupting healthcare. So our vision at Impetus ties really nicely with the transformative technology community, because the community is ultimately looking to define and to raise awareness around well-being and flourishing for up to 1 billion people by the year 2030. So it's a very exciting and audacious goal. And we're going to get there by leveraging a lot of these exponential technologies. And I see Mobio Interactive as being a part of that, as part of that ecosystem, and bringing and transforming the hearts and minds of people across the globe as we take this into the exponential next steps. So with all of that said, the idea behind this webinar series is to start these conversations, these big ideas, these big controversial concepts, and to discuss opportunities and issues around the healthcare industry, what we're facing, what are our challenges or opportunities, and how can technologies like what Mobio Interactive has created can help with. So I am so pleased and happy and honored to have Bashar Saab with me today. He is actually the CEO and chief scientist at Mobio Interactive. We're going to learn all about this as a digital therapeutic and how it's being used to enhance performance, human performance, and empowering better living, less stress, lots of really cool things that we're going to dig into. And it's what's really neat about his company is they blend science with new endpoints like psychobiometrics. So we're going to want to dig into that a little bit, and rigorously integrating efficacy of the products to randomized clinical studies. So this is what makes it so unique. Bechara actually received his undergraduate science degree from the University of BC, which is where he is located right now, and his master's from the University of Glasgow, and his PhD from U of T, so that's my alumnus. He spent the majority of his career conducting research on the brain and has contributed to research in many other unanswered hypotheses on how plasticity, neurochemistry, and neurocircuitry has contributed to mental illness, which I guess brings him to the table today. So welcome, Bechara. So welcome to have you here. Thank you so much. And I wanted to start this off by asking you, with that very colorful background and very interesting, I guess you're a world traveler, as you've mentioned, is how did you go from a science background, learning and researching on the brain, to going about to starting your own company? So maybe you can share with us the navigation and how you got to where you are today.
My pleasure, yeah. So thank you for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me for the Fireside chat. Pleasure to be here. I look forward to the discussion when you and I are done with the introductory materials. So it's interesting. I've given talks on this actually for governments around the world about the similarities or the transition from academia to industry. And for me, the motivation really came from a simple, which can be summarized in a simple word, which is impact. When you are a scientist, or an engineer and you're making discoveries or you're creating new technologies, that's essentially all that you're doing. The implementation of these discoveries and technologies is typically done by business people and politicians. They're the ones who have control over how these things are leveraged for good or evil. And so after many years of doing research, I had felt like I had made some decent contributions to the basic understanding of the world and wanted to have more influence essentially over how these discoveries and technologies would actually impact people. So that's really what it came down to, realization that as a scientist, you're extremely limited in how technology and discoveries are actually translated into real world use. So rather than, create things that can then be used for brainwashing and, dangerous means in the military, for example, I thought, I can take some control over this. So that's the general reason. But to be more specific, my co-founder, Mark Thoburn, who's listening with us right now and will be able to engage in the discussion as well, he came to me when I was still a postdoc and asked me if I could give him some money to start a digital health company. Sounded quite interesting. We discussed for a little while, and then we got going. So I was the first investor in the company as well as the first advisor, and we had weekly calls to work on strategy. And he did a lot of great work early on, particularly on the clinical validation. And once, so then a few years go by, and I have my own laboratory at the psychiatry hospital in Zurich. My academic career is doing very well. But then the first results from our randomized controlled trial came in, showing that our mindfulness app was able to beat placebo in a randomized controlled trial, which is a groundbreaking thing for the whole field of digital therapeutics. So that showed me, okay, this thing actually really works, because until then I didn't believe it worked, right? I mean, I had faith in meditation and I had faith in digital technologies, but that doesn't mean that, you put them together and that you actually get something which works. But it clearly worked. And in addition, people started writing in, because we made the product available in the App Store, writing in to say thank you for what we had developed. That made me realize that it's extremely meaningful. The work we're doing is more meaningful than the work I was doing in the laboratory. And I love the work I was doing in the laboratory. And scientific discovery is incredible. When you bring something into human consciousness for the first time, when you make that discovery and you contribute to the wealth of knowledge that we have, you get a little bit high. But I found that the impact that we had with the digital product got me even more high. And so I really had no choice but to make the transition and to focus full-time on the company, which I did just about 3 years ago. And and it's been wonderful ever since. It's been hard, but it's been great.
Excellent. So, so really, really nice to see that. So I was actually just curious, as we were talking about moving from academia into the world of entrepreneurship. Did you always feel like you were partly an entrepreneur, or is this something that you had to feel that you had to learn the skill sets to doing this? How did that all evolve for you?
Yeah, I was particularly nervous about my lack of understanding of the terminology in business, like a deck. I didn't know what a deck was. So, when an investor who ended up investing in the company later on, he asked me for a deck, and I had to go out and ask somebody, this guy wants to see my deck. What does that even mean? But yeah, I mean, business is it is what it is, and there's some terminology. But I kind of figured it's probably not as complex as the human brain, or or at least it's on a similar level of complexity. So if I can succeed in neuroscience, I can probably succeed in at least getting around business. But I realized quite early on, actually, after leaving the laboratory and working just with the startup, is that there's a lot of similarities between having a small academic lab and having a startup. I mean, you're on the edge, or a tech startup anyway. You're on the edge of technology. You're pushing forward. You're working with extremely ambitious and often egotistical people. You have limited resources. You have all these different challenges, but in many ways, you're trying to save the world or change the world for the better. And so I found way more similarities between having an academic lab and having a startup than I expected. And so for that, it's been really quite good. In addition, I had done a lot of work sort of business type work, even when I was a grad student. So I ran a science outreach program that had hundreds of volunteers, and I had to coordinate them all. And we reached out, we reached thousands and thousands of school children every year. That was an extremely successful program. I loved just the fact that, I was in charge of this thing and I could implement efficiencies. And I've always been obsessed with efficiency since I was a little kid. And so it's more similar than you would imagine. And I was prepared for the managerial aspect because I always knew that, eventually when I was running a lab, I was never going to get that kind of training directly from the universities. I had to go out and get that training on my own. And that meant very early on in my career, even in my early 20s, making friends with mentors that had the experience so I could learn from them. And then also being part of business type organizations, not for profits, and having a managerial type of role there to get ready for something like this. So it worked out really nice.
So you were one of the original, I guess, like you said, investors, co-founders of the whole concept. So when you think back to, how many years ago was it that the company formed?
We first started speaking about it 7 years ago. Things really started getting rolling around 2015, and then I joined in 2017. And that's when we started getting our first chunks of investment. And so, yeah.
So there was already a product there in place, and you were sort of now just kind of tweaking and managing their clinical study? Or tell me a little bit about the onset of where the company started, and was there any pivots and changes to the actual product of what it is today?
Yes. I mean, the very early days, and Mark, who's on, my co-founder, who's on the call, will enjoy this. The idea was to build this, and maybe we'll do it eventually, but it was way ahead of its time, and you'll see why. So to use an EEG headband combined with this device called Connect, which records your motions, to create a game where you fly around this fictional island as an eagle, and eventually you can become other animals. Anyway, you're an eagle and you fly around with your body motion. And then using the EEG headband, you actually have to get your brain into a certain state of focus in order to be able to visualize things on the screen. So you got a TV and that shows where you're going like a normal video game, but you play the entire thing with your brain and your body. Anyway, so the prototype was built. It's kind of great idea, but it was so unintuitive to play. And it was clear to me and to Mark as well that it was just way ahead of its time. And this is 6-7 years ago. And then it wasn't really until we made contact with a professor at the University of Toronto where we decided to make the transition into delivering meditation and also to measure that meditation, the success of that meditation in each individual on a personal level. And then we got some more grants, and I gave up some more of my own money in order to start a collaboration with the University of Waterloo to develop the psychobiometrics. Now we have the ability to really record heart rate variability just from the mobile device camera, and then translate that information with the neural network into an accurate reading of stress, and then bookend any meditation with that. Now you know how each meditation is able to reduce the stress of each individual. And so, there's quite a bit of a iteration towards that. We built the first product for research purposes, and then we started building a second project in late 2017 called AM, Mindfulness. Mindfulness, available in the app stores. Please download and use. And and we're still working towards making a really, really fantastic personalized experience. But it's getting well right now.
Fantastic. So in the earlier iteration, how different was that headband and the kind of whole motion thing? Was there concerns that it was too similar to something like Muse, the company that Ariel Garter has created? Or was it this just wasn't intuitive? Let's come up with something more practical or intuitive.
It predated Muse and Interaxon, but also it was a very different idea. It was meant to be a fun game, ideally for elderly people, to help them be more active and to train their brain at the same time. I think the idea is fantastic, but building something like this, particularly way back then, was quite tough to do. We might eventually build it out, and we actually still have a virtual reality game, which has much of the similar code that also involves meditation, and that's going through clinical trials right now at UBC with cancer patients. So the way it started out and what it is now is really, really, really different. Yeah. I mean, it's not, you shouldn't even say it's it. Like we now build a completely different product, right?
Right. And sometimes sometimes you're ahead of yourself in time, and sometimes you need the technology to catch up to where you are, or sometimes you need people to catch up to where something needs to be. So oftentimes the development of our products is an iterative process. And so you just never know what will happen in 2 years or 3 years, or you bring up the idea of bringing in VR. You know, in some ways, VR came in at a time and place where people just were not ready for the technology. And who knows what the iteration of what VR is going to look and feel like in, 2 to 5 years. And, is there going to be an opportunity to make this more broad stroke and more applicable to a broader audience? So these are some of the interesting questions I think that we all have. So we have, as you know, in this ecosystem, have a lot of entrepreneurs, startups, companies that are already underway but are looking to grow. Maybe you can actually discuss your past experience with defining and developing your group of founders. So again, I know that you said that Mark approached you. How would you recommend to other entrepreneurs who are either starting or looking at other co-founders of selecting people to work with? Like, so what are some of the watch outs? What are some of the things that you need to gravitate towards, and the kinds of advice that you would give to do that?
Well, the number one thing, and this isn't just for your co-founders, but it also applies to all your employees, your advisors, and your investors. Number one thing, hands down, is trust. You have to have complete trust in the people with whom you work. Otherwise, they'll be second guessing. You won't feel confident, moving forward on certain projects. Excuse me. So Mark and I have known each other for 2 decades and have been close friends the entire time. We used to live together when we were, kids, in a little house in Kitsilano. And so that there was no issue. Then we have a third co-founder now, who's our CTO, Avitas Muradian. We met him in 2017. He didn't join until 2019. So we had trust with him as well. And that's for me, hands down, the most important thing. And then after that, well, you need to have your shared mission. That's for certain. People have to be aligned. And I learned that very early on in my own career with running not-for-profits, particularly because at not-for-profits, most of the people with whom I worked were volunteers. So the only thing that motivates them is the mission, right? There's no money involved, right? And typically they're doing this on top of many other things. So that's the next thing. I think people need to be motivated and aligned along the same mission. And if you don't think that that's the case with somebody, well, then they're not appropriate, no matter how talented they may be. And then third would really be talent. So what skills do they bring to the table? How what kind of core things can they actually do? That's the third most important thing. But in general, take your time. And that's important. We typically have at least 4 interviews before we hire somebody, at least.
Very, very good words of wisdom there. Now, it would be remiss of us to not discuss the world that we're living in right now. I mean, many of us are still just kind of emerging out of the self-quarantine because of COVID-19. We've been kind of cloistered away. We've been using a lot of these, asynchronous and synchronous tools for collaboration and discussions. How has things changed for you in terms of relationships, or what advice would you give if people are just thinking about starting now, or they need to be hiring now? What are some of the tips and tricks that you have used to be able to manage trustability, credibility, culture management in these times of not being able to get the social and psychological cues that we're so used to when we get those in person?
That's you bring up a really important point. There's an old saying, I don't know if it's true or not, but they say, like 90% of communication, or whatever the percentage is, 70% or something, of communication is nonverbal. And that's very, very true. The majority of that, I think, are visual cues. So as long as you can have people on video, and we insist that we interview on video, specifically for that reason. So we can pick up on those cues and get to know somebody a little better. So, with video, I think you get, video plus audio. I think you get the vast majority of things. The only thing that you're probably missing out on are those pheromones. And I think most of that stuff is so basic, and, it has more to do with, compatibility on a relationship level, like a sexual relationship level, that I don't think it probably matters so much. So my guess is that through video, you can do things almost as good, like really well, almost as good as you could in person. And then don't forget how much time we save and how much energy we save, right? I mean, I don't know what the numbers are on the average commute time in around the world, but it's more than 30 minutes, right? Maybe it's an hour round trip. So that's just like an hour. If every single person in the world that works, they've just liberated, boom, because they had to stay home and work. And like this fireside chat, I mean, how efficient is this? It's incredible. So I think there's a huge number of efficiencies that are brought about by adapting digital technologies, particularly things like this. So, embrace that stuff and use it to your advantage. Absolutely. Our team has always been distributed. I live in Zurich in Switzerland, and I refused to, move back to Toronto for the company, not because I thought, that would be bad, but because I knew that, me being close to a ski hill, right? Me being close to the mountains, I do a lot of backcountry skiing. For me, that's like that sustains me, right? Like that and playing music are my therapy, right? And meditation. Right? Meditation for me is actually more of a performance enhancement than a therapy. And so that was important. I had to maintain that. And Mark was very supportive. He's like, look, you got to be where you're going to be happy. And so we've always had this distributed team. Impetus is in Vancouver. We have our security officer. She's in Toronto. We have our AI specialist. He's in Shanghai. And it's always been like this. So for us, this distributed team has been something that we've adapted to from the very onset. And we have I think the most important thing you can do is to make sure you have routine times when you all meet on the regular. So my whole team gets together twice per week at the very beginning of the week to set our priorities. And we use the OKR system and the initiatives and all that, to really make sure that we're all aligned. And then on Fridays, we all meet and we have what we call a demo celebration, where people visually go through and demonstrate something of their work. And then we all, clap and celebrate and really get to understand what people are doing. And we also do a meditation as a group once a week as well. And these kinds of things really keep you together. So
yeah, I absolutely love some of those best practices. That is absolutely very cool. As we know, there's tons of information, videos, webinars, articles that are being written on culture generation in the virtual space, how to do this. I think people are going to find that happy medium, just like the swinging of the pendulum. What's the appropriate cadence? I think companies like yourselves and mine, we've always been distributed in virtual for the last 11 years. And so we're old hat at this, but there's a lot of people just coming into the space, getting into that emotional and psychological rhythm and the right cadence to get really comfortable. But I think this is the new normal. And I think there's a lot of people who are going to be gravitating into this new way of working. And I think it's going to be very exciting to see what happens with that. So I'm just going to step back a little bit and talk more about what you've created at Mobio Interactive, specifically the app and what it's all about. Maybe you can describe to the group here what exactly it is, what does your company represent, and how are you planning to change the world with this?
Mm-hmm. We have a meditation app, essentially. It's called Mindfulness. Is spelled A-M. I think Mark put a link there in the chat. And the unique selling proposition of the app is confidence that it works, right? So we test the app. We've tested it now in 2 randomized controlled trials and 1 clinical trial. And in all 3 times, we've been able to show statistical significance that it works. In the case of the clinical trial with cancer patients, the app is as effective as group psychotherapy. So we're really, really focusing first on efficacy. And I think one of the reasons why we have such an effective product is because of the second unique selling proposition. And that's the ability to measure and measure in a scalable way. So we don't require you to use a headband or to buy an Apple Watch or some other wearable. because we really believe in making this as accessible as possible. And wearables don't just have a barrier because of the additional expense of purchase, but they also have a barrier because you have to carry it around with you. Whereas the phone, you're going to carry your phone with you everywhere you go anyway. So, it's a pain in the ass to carry your phone around, you could argue, but you have multiple reasons to do so. And so that's the unique thing about the app. Clinical validation against placebo. There's only one meditation app to show that so far, and that's us. And then you have a ability to measure your progress, at least in terms of stress right now. So how your stress is affected objectively using the mobile device camera and a 30-second selfie video. And so that's pretty unique. And then what that allows you to do is then, allows the app to actually learn what is most effective for each individual. And then we have an algorithm that takes that information and then starts recommending meditation practices. And the level of personalization really has no limit. And so we've started with small things, just like this is the content which the algorithm indicates should be most effective for you. So we encourage you to engage with it. But we also have self-learning neural networks now, which are trying to understand, well, what's the best time of day for each individual, or other subtle aspects about their practice that have to do with them to really, really build something which is more effective. And of course, we can do this not just for meditation, but any other kind of psychotherapy that you can deliver digitally. So this would include cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, art therapy, music therapy, all this type of stuff. And we intend to expand in that direction as well.
So tell us a little bit, as you're starting off with stress, or the measurement of that. Tell us a little bit about this idea of the psychobiometrics. That's kind of a new term for many of us here. What exactly is that? And how have you incorporated that as part of the meditation app? And where would this apply to your future growth in some of these other indications or areas of interest?
The psychobiometrics, you break that apart. The first word is psycho, and that means somebody who's crazy. No, I'm joking. That refers to mental processes, essentially. Biometric is then measurement of something biological. And so it's the measurement of mental states, essentially, stress being one of them. The way that we do our psychobiometrics is through something inside the app called a snapshot. It takes a couple minutes to complete in total, and it has 4 sections. One is the 30-second selfie video, and we can talk about that later, the tech about how that works. Another is a stress slider, where all you do is just indicate from none to max how much stress you feel. Another is something called a mood board, or an emotion circumplex. This is a tool that's been used in psychological research for decades. And somebody's asked to say the name. The name of the product is A-M, space mindfulness. Mindfulness. A little bit hard to find. I'll digress for a second here. The reason why we chose the name is because it's a mispronunciation of the word am. Am is the present tense of the verb to be, and so kind of like a linguistic embodiment of what mindfulness is, focusing on the present moment. We pronounce it because it's much more similar to the ancient meditation chant. In addition, l'âme in French means the soul, and so it kind of has that crossover. So there's a few reasons why. Anyway, back to the snapshot. So the first thing is the selfie. The next thing is the stress slider. The next thing is the mood board. And then the mood board has 4 different components to it, or 4 different quadrants. And inside of these quadrants are different mood words. And all you do is pick those mood words. A very simple thing, but people don't know it, but this actually has an algorithm behind it as well, which then calculates a score of mood. And then the 4th component is just the ability to write in notes. And we don't leverage that right now. It's something which a lot of people find useful, because you can look back over the notes and you can see, oh yeah, that's how I was feeling because of this at that point in time, which can be really helpful for your own introspection. Now, those 4 components, out of those 4 components, the first 3 have been benchmarked to medical questionnaires. We know that they're medically relevant and they're providing information which is important. And the first one, the selfie, is completely objective. Right? So it's what it measures is the the cognitive stress, and for that we use a proxy, the balance of the autonomic nervous system. Yeah, I can describe the tech, how that's used. Should I do that now, or?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, because I'm interested in that, because there obviously is an application to clinical endpoints since you're actually doing actual clinical studies.
Right. Yeah. So it's very simple. It uses something called PPGI, photoplasmographic imaging, which is a fancy word to describe the measure of volume using images. And in our case, what we do is we record your heart rate through the color change of the skin on your face. As your heart beats, bum, 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 your arteries dilate, bum, 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 bum. And as they dilate, then that changes the color of your skin a little bit. And so you become a little bit more red. We can't see it with our eyes, but a computer can pick it up. And then you get a little bit less red and a little bit more red and a little bit less red. Well, this corresponds to the rhythm of your heart. So we developed the algorithm with the University of Waterloo, such that we run essentially a statistical analysis of the readout of 6 different wavelengths of light from the face. So the first thing, we identify face, then we lock onto it so we can control for motion artifacts. We find regions of the skin that are uniform in color, and we record from those pixels specifically. And then we use statistical analysis to pull out heart rate and heart rate variability, which is then separated into 2 different frequency spectrums. One which corresponds almost exclusively to the parasympathetic nervous system regulation of heart rate. So your nervous system actually innervates the heart and helps control heart rate, and specifically the autonomic nervous system through the sinoatrial node. Now, because of that, the regulation of your heart rate variability gives a readout of your autonomic nervous system. So essentially, we're looking at the balance from your fight and flight versus your rest and digest mechanisms. And that's what gives us a readout of stress. This information we then use to train a neural network that can then understand what stress is without any other input. It's about 80–90% accurate, which I think is more or less the ceiling, because remember, everything is tested against the self-assessment of stress by necessity. And it's hard to find anything more accurate than, like, people aren't even that accurate, right? That's the issue. So we're sort of limited to what's the ceiling of people's own ability to know what their stress is. In addition, there are more things which contribute to stress other than the autonomic nervous system. And we're exclusively measuring the autonomic nervous system, almost exclusively, let's say. There are some other things which are affected, but that's the main thing. So we have that objective readout. Now, what's important to keep in mind is that because it's only 80–90% accurate, each measurement should not be taken too seriously. And that's really important, because you might get something that goes, oh, it says I'm really stressed, and then you want to get stressed. No, don't let that happen. What's really important are the averages over time, and particularly the differences before and after engaging in content, or the averages on something called the check-in. So we're trying to encourage people more and more in the product to do a check-in with the snapshot, ideally at the same time every day, and then you get kind of like a longitudinal profile of how you're doing, including through the objective measures, if you so desire. And then you can look back over that, maybe share it with your doctor, I don't know, stuff like that.
Very interesting. So there's a lot there, and it's extremely intriguing. This is personally the first time that I've heard that facial coloration can translate into a metric associated with heart rate variability. I think that's truly innovative and very interesting that you built an algorithm with some back-end machine learning to be able to learn. And I'm assuming that part of this process is not only doing longitudinal scanning of facial changes, but asking the recipient or the user to be able to do their meditation different times of the day so that machine can get smarter. Is that sufficient? Is that correct in what I'm paraphrasing there?
Yeah, I mean, it's not so targeted right now. We have a lot of work to do on the product. We focused on the efficacy of the clinical trials, the building up the tech. Now we have another hurdle, I think, which is to design the product in such a way that it's really easy to use. And right now, I think it's pretty hard for a lot of people to use. And that you see that in our retention metrics. So you get a lot of people dropping off right away, but the people who stick with it for a very, very long time. So we got to work on the product itself. Like, most people don't have the advantage of listening to me speak about it to understand what it is. So there's a lot of work to be done.
Yeah. What about the mood board? That sounds like more of a self-assessment What is that measuring, and is that part of the clinical trial endpoints as well? Because it sounds very, it almost sounds like a quality of life measure.
Yeah, yeah. So this mood board has been, significantly correlates with medical questionnaires on mood. So we know that it has some medical relevance. Um, and as I said, it spits out a number associated with mood, right? Which is kind of, in some ways, like, how do you actually do that, right? But the reality is, to a reasonable approximation, you can have certain words associated with better mood versus worse mood, right? So depressed, for example, that's worse mood, whereas excited is better mood, right? On average. So so that tool we consider to be an implicit measurement. So it is a self-assessment, but nobody knows what words are associated with what points, and we purposefully do not educate anybody on that information, so that you're not biased and you don't choose words in order to influence the score of mood.
Yeah, interesting. Now, I just wanted to spend a couple minutes because we are getting a lot of interested questions around the clinical trial. So here's where it's really interesting, and I'm also curious about your pathway for approval. So right now, this product is available to the consumer market. You can download it on, Google Play or the iOS store, and away you go. But you're also, concurrently navigating the process for getting this approved as a prescribed, am I assuming, is it a prescribed digital therapeutic? Tell me a little bit about what the strategic intent of your C-suite has decided about this product, and why have you decided to go down the route, and the complicated route, and the very long-winded route of going down the path of the digital therapeutic?
Well, look, there's a lot of products that do, that deliver meditation, and but it's so the question is, I mean, look, if we're going to do something, we got to be doing something which is different. We got to be, otherwise, why not just join another team, right? Why even bother starting a new company? So I think we are doing something different. And the reason we want to go into the healthcare economy is because we really have the ability to help patients and people alike. But when your doctor prescribes something to you, you take it a little more seriously than if you just see it on a commercial. So that's an important thing, is that the trust and people, realizing that this is a validated tool, I think helps them give it a little bit more time and to take it more seriously, which in turn can really have an effect on its overall efficacy. Because if you believe in it, then you're going to be more engaged. If you're more engaged, and you're going to get more experience with the product, and so forth. So that's important. I think the ability for us to actually have impact is dramatically increased when we go through the healthcare system. There's also a business case for this as well. That once you're regulatory approved and you can be reimbursed by health insurers, well, then the end user doesn't need to pay for it. So it's free for people, which is good, and I think it should be. I think this is such an important thing for the economy of the world, actually, in terms of reducing mental illness and increasing productivity, reducing burnout, that it should be something that governments are willing to pay for in one way or another. So essentially, it's a cost borne by the taxpayer. We help to make the world economy more efficient and healthier. The only way you can really do that effectively is to go through the whole process of validation and regulatory approval. Now, the clinical validation, the real reason why we do it isn't to get regulatory approval or reimbursement or anything like that. The real reason why we do it is because we don't want to be wasting our time, right? If it's like I'm not going to quit my job in academia and join some company just to build an app. I mean, I have no interest in that. I have an interest in actually delivering something that works. So it wasn't until after I realized that we could beat active control that I was willing to give up my academic career. But the number one reason why we do that is because we have no interest otherwise.
And what is the active control in this scenario? Is it CBT? What, or is it something else that's prescribed?
Great question. Yeah. So an active control ideally should be something that the trial participants believe can have an effect. Is the main thing for which you want to control, in addition to the fact that they're in a study and they're getting engagement by the research staff. You want to control for the placebo effect, which is the most robust effect in all of medical literature, right? I mean, the placebo is real, right? Like that, when you think something is going to go well, you have a higher chance of it going well. So that's really important. So what we did was we took a brain training game, well, a very simple one. It's called 2048. Some of you probably know it. And essentially it's kind of like a mix between math and Tetris, where you match these blocks up together. And we take that software and then we integrate it into our app as a replacement of the meditation content. So you still have the before and after psychobiometrics, you still have the same type of experience, and you still have the ability to indicate to people, look, we think this is supposed to be healthy for your brain. Do it, at least 4 times a week for a certain number of weeks, and then you'll get then you've completed the study. So that's what we've used in the past, and that's what we continue to use now. And so far it's been pretty good. So
it's very interesting. So obviously going through the clinical trial process requires patience and it requires funding, because you're not basically making anything per se right now, unless there is. Have you created a business model where you're still propelling this forward, there's revenues, or is this completely being delivered and relied on by investor money? So tell the ecosystem here about what your methodology has been, so that you can safely take this product properly through the right channels of doing clinical studies.
So the early days, we relied heavily on grants, primarily from the Ontario and the Canadian government, that came with matching funds from the company, which primarily came from my savings from what I earned as an academic. And so that was fantastic. And then also the in-kind funding from the researchers that are interested at the intellectual level. So that, over $1 million, free money, go do the trials. Now we actually have created a little bit of a business model because we have extensive experience in running these trials. We can partner with pharmaceutical companies who are interested in using our technology as an adjunct therapy. And so we can then have them pay for the clinical trials directly. We may make some money on the overhead. We may lose some money on the trial, but at least it's not something that we have to raise for specifically. And that allows us to kind of ease into this and then gain a shit ton of knowledge from their experience in actually getting things regulatory approved and reimbursed and distributed. And so that's a really important part of what we do. I actually really love working with the pharmaceutical companies, and that's working really well for us. But they won't, the only reason why they talk to us is because we have clinical validation and objective quantification, and we publish the stuff and it's vetted and we let them see it, right? So that's really, really, really key to these types of partnerships.
And so with your partnerships with pharmaceutical companies, which by the way, there's a lot of audience here who are also, that's who we service as the life science companies. Is these exclusives that you set up with people where a company is basically partnered with you and said, we'll pay for this completely, but if anything good comes out of, phase 2, phase 3, that's basically our thing? How have you been able to negotiate IP and who owns what? And is this exclusive to one specific company? For example, if somebody else wanted to partner with you to see what comes out of it, can they leverage your technology?
Yeah, so I mean, you do want to navigate this carefully. Obviously, the pharmaceutical companies, they want as much exclusivity as they can get. And so it's, so typically our strategy is to try to get exclusivity based on indication and region of going to market. So pharmaceutical company would essentially own, and if they want to, they make that region global, right? But only for a certain indication. And that makes sense to them as well, because they do all their budgets and their planning and everything based on indications. And there could be a group of indications as well. So if we're going for regulatory approval for certain indications with a particular pharmaceutical company, well then, yeah, we think, and if they're paying for the clinical trials, then we think they deserve to have exclusivity in that indication for all the regions of the world where they actually want to go to market. In addition, because they're taking care of a lot of the upfront costs, they will get the lion's share of the revenue after we go to market. And that's fine too, because they're doing all the stuff. They're going to be doing the marketing, the distribution, et cetera, et cetera. So they get almost everything, let's say, but they take care for things up front. And that's fine for us, for our business model, for the phase that we are, for the stage that we are as a company.
And it's a very interesting model. I mean, pharmaceutical companies are constantly looking and navigating their own business models, which is how do they enhance or extend their loss of exclusivity period, where they might, for example, be able to add on a digital therapeutic, say, for example, to a product that might be used for depression or anxiety or some other mental illness or condition. So there's an opportunity there, or it's a different competitive differentiator where, one day we're probably going to see the day where there's going to be a digital pharmacy and the physician will prescribe perhaps their product and or something that might be in the digital pharmacy store. So it's a very, very interesting model. And I'm sure there's a lot of people who may be interested in these discussions with you amidst other ones who are dealing in the digital therapeutic area. So my last question for you before I open this up to others, because I have a ton of things I can keep asking. Actually, I have two questions. I wanted to find out, this regulatory pathway. I realize that this is a Canadian product. Have you opened these discussions up globally? And what is your regulatory pathway plan? Are you planning to do this when you're, through the clinical trial approval process, FDA, Canada? Are you going to do this all simultaneously? What is your plan or your pathway for regulatory approval?
Our first large-scale clinical trials are taking place in Europe. And so we're already in discussions with the European Medical Agency to really get their input to ensure that the trials that we're running will, assuming we get positive results, right? So pending on the positive results and a reasonable effect size, would be sufficient to then proceed with an application for regulatory approval. EMA and the FDA work together on a lot of this stuff. So you can actually do an application to both of them at the same time. And then once you get those two approved, then then other places like the CFDA, that's China, and other places in the world gets much, much easier. So our approach is to really go after the big people at the beginning, and then, make sure we work directly with them in the design of our trials even, which we are doing. And then once those those approvals start coming in, then start fanning out elsewhere. I mean, the process is expensive, right? So it makes sense to do it step by step.
Are you in a phase 2 or phase 3, or where are you at with the clinical trial process?
Phase 3.
Phase 3, right? So, okay, very interesting. Now, the other thing as well too is COVID-19. People are highly stressed. How did you get your first 100 customers, and what's your plan of action of accumulating usage while you're actually going through the clinical trial process? What is your plan around customer acquisition?
Well, that's interesting. So we have a few different streams. We maintain a B2C presence. We don't do any marketing. We do that because we want to have a pool of people that that we can use to be continually testing the product. For us, that's really important that we have the real world data, right? Real world evidence on efficacy and usage is really important to us in developing a high quality product. Then we also have a number of channel partners. So for example, if you're a member of WeWork, you get a discount to our product. And there's other channel partners. We also have bundling. So we have signed relationships with insurers where they sell our product on to the corporations that they underwrite. And we, that allows us to get exposure that way. So we have a number of different channels, but what we don't do, at least not yet, is any marketing.
I find what you're doing is very exciting, especially with the incorporation, like again, of AI, machine learning, and your roadmap for starting to navigate other areas outside of stress. So I'm sure there's probably performance enhancing with partnering with sports medicine. And I'm sure there's other things like you were saying around cognitive behavioral therapy and other sorts of therapies. So a very interesting roadmap on what the future of that looks like. So I'm actually going to take a few minutes now to see if anybody in the group would like to raise their hand or ask a question. I'm going to see if anybody wants to have a question. We can certainly let you speak or raise your hand. I guess while we're waiting for people to ask their questions is, and you can actually open up your webcam if you're interested, and we'll actually hear your voice, or you can just have me read your question. But I was just curious about what your vision is for the long term for Mobio Interactive. What is that long-term plan?
Oh, well, that's one of the world's great secrets, isn't it? Yeah, we definitely have a long-term plan. It's yeah, we want to change the world. Change the world's a little bit extreme. I think we really want to a transition in the healthcare economy itself, such that it becomes more of a meritocracy. In my opinion, if anything should be a meritocracy, it's medicine. And because of that, we really hope that our digital technologies are able to usher in a new era of value-based, outcome-based reimbursement. You pay for the effect rather than the service. So that's a big part of where we plan to go and support in the future.
Beautiful. I want to open this up for all of you. I have actually unmuted, so if there's noise going on in your background, can you please mute yourself? But is there anybody here who would like to ask a question? Sorry, I'm just going to mute everybody just a sec. And I'm going to open you up in a minute. Yeah, so I just have you now, Bashar, I just have you open. So you can see that there's a lot of interest in the clinical studies and your vision for this. But, can you spend a couple of minutes just talking about how things have changed, or you visualize the change because of COVID-19? What did you see before this? What do you see afterwards? Do you see there being different partnership opportunities? Do you think there's going to be a rush of people who are going to be downloading this because we've seen, an advent of, new mental health issues because of isolation and other things? What have you seen, or do you anticipate seeing in the months ahead? Sorry, just 1 second. I have to unmute you. I can hear you now.
Great. I think it's pretty clear that one of the biggest effects of COVID has been a push for the entire world to go digital. Right? The digital transformation has supposed to have been upon us, like for the last 5 years or something. Well, now it's really taking hold. And that, really highlights the importance of having tools, like medical tools that you can distribute over the internet, which digital therapeutics, does. So I think it's been extremely positive for our industry. Even in the field of digital health, digital therapeutics have been invested in. Well, that's changing now. Our company, and a lot of our peers are now actually closing a lot of rounds. We're closing a round right now. So people realize, the business people are starting to realize how important this has always been, because now we're actually forced to stay home, and how advantageous it is to really go digital when it comes to healthcare. So I think it's been really positive. I am a notorious optimist. All right. And, I really see the world being able to learn lessons from COVID, and to emerge stronger and better. And I'm going to do everything in my power, certainly, to help make that the case. So, and I think transformation towards more digital healthcare is a big part of that. And that's a good thing.
And it's a beautiful thing. And I think one of the things that we are running into as we start to navigate things like tracers, and, we heard recently that Apple and Google paired together to put together a whole algorithmic process of automating that. But you're running, and we are all collectively running into some of these big questions. So COVID has been an accelerant of change. And so one of the issues at the table is about bioethics and about privacy and about surveillance. And so this is probably something that you may actually run into in your discussions, with regulatory departments. How do you respond to that overarching concern about privacy, about data ownership, and about surveillance?
Well, I mean, in our opinion, ultimately, data is owned by the individual that creates those data. And we think, don't know for sure, but we think blockchain is going to play a huge role in this. So we're very supportive of, we're part of the special interest group on healthcare inside of Hyperledger. And we're really interested in working with people to create a global blockchain for medical data that can be leveraged around the world to help protect things. I'm not a blockchain expert, I'm a neuroscientist. So I honestly don't understand all the details behind it, but there's enough push in this direction. And my vague understanding of blockchain, makes it clear to me that this has potential to really solve a lot of those issues. And so I think that's how it'll emerge actually. And it seems like of all the ways to use blockchain, other than to, funnel money around illegally, which is a great way to use blockchain from some perspectives. One of the great things is really to manage medical data. And so I think that eventually that'll happen. Although there's going to be a lot of fits and starts in the process.
I'm an old biohacker, so I have the old version of the Aura Ring.
Wow.
So
that's a great product. I think
this is actually like an old school one. They have newer ones, but Fitbits, things like that. There is a question that came up that's really interesting. So you've really isolated a very, very cool biometric in the methodology that you're doing that through the screenshot of the face. There is a question that's come in about potential partnerships with other big companies. So, Apple, Fitbit, Aura, integrating all of these these biometrics with the psychobiometric into some big holistic tool. Is that part of the plan for your company?
It is, yeah. It's not been a major priority for us, but it's something that we should have our first launched product. It's an EEG band from a company that we've signed up with. We'll launch with them soon this year. And I think combining with a lot of these companies makes a lot of sense, but we don't want to be dependent on it for the reasons I said before. It's like, we really want to bring healthcare to every human, and we want it to be, available everywhere. And wearables will never achieve that. And until you have a direct brain implant, that's something that could happen around the world everywhere, but we're talking decades from now. So in terms of these years, we need to be independent from wearables, but partnering with wearables and adding that on is definitely in our pipeline. We're excited to do so. And so if there's people on the call that have a wearable they think would fit well with our tech, feel free to contact me.
Beautiful. And we're all anticipating Elon Musk's Neuralink, so I guess that might answer some of that. So how can people, there is a lot of really, really interesting stuff here. We could literally talk to you for hours. Super, super interesting, Bechara. So how can people find you and find your company?
Right. I guess LinkedIn is a good way to find me. I also have a Medium account, so please follow me on Medium. And I'll be publishing a number of articles soon. I have 5 in the works. So I don't know if I can find, maybe Mark, if you're still on the call, if you can find my LinkedIn and my Medium links, that'd be great.
I will also
and then
post those actually in there. I'll post
right.
those as well afterwards.
And then there's, and then of course is the company website, which is midigitaltherapeutics.com. You can also go mobiointeractive.com, but for certain reasons that does a redirect. So midigitaltherapeutics.com. And my email address is bechara@mobiointeractive.com. So that's pretty easy. Yeah, I mean, it's great. Love to hear from people.
Awesome. It's beautiful, beautiful thing. Super interesting. Love what you're doing. It is outstanding. Just for those of you who won't, if you want to hear this again, I will send you a link so you can hear the recording of this. So more than welcome. Please look for that email in the next few days. Has been absolutely a pleasure. We at Impetus, as well as the trans tech community, really want to thank you. This is a great, courageous conversation. Everything again starts with a thought, and we are all here to collectively work on starting these conversations, bridging that gap, using these kinds of tools so that we can reach out to people across the globe to start disrupting healthcare in a positive way. And like you were saying before, Bechara, bringing healthcare and health and well-being and flourishing to as many people as we can. So thank you so much. Thanks to everybody for your time today. Wishing you all a fantastic day ahead.
Thank you.